Today, we're going to try and unravel the story of one of modern history's most fascinating and, frankly, most controversial figures, Muammar Gaddafi. For 42 years, he had this iron grip on Libya, and his story, well, it's a wild ride of revolution, brutal oppression, and some serious global drama.
So let's just start right here with this absolutely chilling quote. In 2011, with the Arab Spring knocking on his door, he went on TV and promised to hunt down the rebels, challenging him, quote, "Inch by inch, house by house, alley by alley." This was the sound of a cornered dictator, a man who'd been in power for decades, realizing his time might finally be up.
And really, that's the big question we're asking today. How did this guy, this larger-than-life figure who called himself the King of Kings of Africa, meet such a brutal, humiliating end? To figure that out, we've got to go all the way back to the beginning.
So let's rewind the clock. Way before the eccentric uniforms, the all-female bodyguard crew, and all that, he was just a young man with some very radical ideas, shaped by life in the desert and a rapidly changing Arab world.
You know, his rise to power was pretty improbable. Gaddafi was literally born in a tent in the desert, part of a minor tribe, nowhere near the centers of power. But he was completely captivated by what was happening in Egypt with Gamal Abdel Nasser and this idea of Arab nationalism. So for him, joining the military wasn't just about a career. It was the path to revolution. And in 1969, when Libya's king was out of the country, a 27-year-old Captain Gaddafi saw his opening, and he took it in a surprisingly bloodless coup.
And just like that, the Gaddafi era had begun. He started calling himself the brother leader, and for the next 4 decades, he would shape Libya into a nation of really incredible and often incredibly violent contradictions.
Okay, this slide right here gets to the very heart of the Gaddafi paradox. On one side, he took Libya's massive oil money and built a serious welfare state. We're talking free education, free healthcare, the literacy rate shot up. In fact, by the 2010s, Libya had the highest human development index, basically the highest standard of living in all of Africa. But, and it's a huge but, all of this was built on a foundation of pure terror. If you formed a political party, the punishment was death. Public executions were aired on state TV, and his secret police hunted down his critics overseas, who he famously called stray dogs.
And he wasn't just your standard dictator. No, he had his own whole political philosophy to back it all up, which he wrote down in his Green Book. He called it the Jamahiria, a state of the masses. He pitched it as this revolutionary third way, something that wasn't capitalism and wasn't communism. In reality, though, it was a pretty clever system for making sure all power, and I mean all of it, stayed with him.
And speaking of his ambition, you had to talk about this project, the Great Man-Made River. I mean, this thing was a truly colossal undertaking, a massive network of underground pipes to bring fresh water from ancient aquifers deep under the Sahara Desert all the way to the coastal cities. Gaddafi loved to call it the eighth wonder of the world, and it really shows you the scale of his vision for Libya.
Okay, so while he's building these massive projects at home, he's also trying to export his revolution everywhere else. And this is the part of the story that turned Libya into an international outcast for decades.
I mean, just look at this timeline. It is a wild ride. In the 80s, he's a total pariah, getting bombed by the US, sanctioned by the UN for the Lockerbie attack. Then, in 2003, right after the US invasion of Iraq, he sees what happened to Saddam Hussein and makes a massive pivot. He voluntarily gives up his entire weapons of mass destruction program. And just like that, he starts his slow crawl back to international acceptance, which ends with him, believe it or not, being elected chairman of the African Union. The ultimate comeback story, or so it seemed.
But let's not forget why he was a pariah in the first place. His regime had its hands in conflicts all over the globe. He was sending money and weapons to groups like the IRA, and of course, he was directly tied to major acts of terrorism, like the bombing of that Berlin nightclub full of US soldiers, and the big one, the 1988 bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, a horrific act that killed 270 innocent people.
So even after he'd kind of cleaned up his image on the world stage, it wasn't enough to save him. In 2011, that revolutionary fire that started in Tunisia and Egypt finally spread to Libya, and Gaddafi's whole world just came crashing down with unbelievable speed.
Just look how fast it all happened. What started as protests in February exploded into a full-blown civil war by March. The UN stepped in, authorizing a no-fly zone to stop him from bombing his own people. By August, the rebels had stormed his main compound in Tripoli. And then, just 2 months later, that was it. Game over.
And this brings us right back to the end. He wasn't found in a palace or some secret military bunker. He was found hiding in a concrete drainage pipe near his hometown. The King of Kings of Africa was pulled out of a ditch by rebel fighters and killed shortly after. It's just a stunningly inglorious end for a man who held so much power for so long.
So after 42 years of absolute power, followed by that chaotic, violent end, what is Gaddafi's legacy? What did he actually leave behind?
This chart tells a really powerful story. Remember how we said in 2010 Libya was #1 in Africa for standard of living? Well, look at it less than a decade after he was gone. It had plummeted. Now, this is absolutely not a defense of his brutal regime. Not at all. But it is a pretty stark reminder of the fact that when he was gone, the stability, even if it was a brutal stability, was gone too, and absolute chaos rushed in to fill that vacuum.
At the end of the day, there's just no simple verdict on Gaddafi. For some people, he was a hero, an anti-colonialist who stood up to the West and used oil money to build up his country. But for his thousands of victims, he was a monster, a murderous tyrant, and a terrorist. The one thing nobody can really argue with is that his fall didn't solve everything. It left behind a massive power vacuum that plunged Libya into a devastating civil war that's lasted for years.
So that's the question we're left with, isn't it? Was he a nation builder who lifted his people out of poverty? Or was he a destructive tyrant who terrorized his own people and left his country in ruins? The truth is, he was probably both. And that complicated, bloody, and still unresolved legacy is what Libya is still grappling with today.